Hello. Before I begin this creepypasta story, I would like to state that it was told to me by a family friend, who says that he really experienced paranormal and supernatural creatures like Sasquatch and werewolves, but would make the claim that aliens did not exist, and that the UFOs you see in the sky all the time are government-controlled crafts, being flown by humans. And when I used to work for him, he would tell me all sorts of crazy-sounding stories that I myself didn't believe. But this isn't about me, this is about you, the viewer. What do you believe? After hearing this, let me know down in the comments if you believe this or you don't. Now let's get into the creepypasta. I was a young boy in the 1970s, at the age of 10. And I can still remember how strange and scary my life was, while living on a farm, and for reasons you will never believe. Heck, I wouldn't blame you if you doubted the story I am about to tell you, for it is one that sounds fabricated. But I assure you, it's 100% true. My name is Lenny, not my real name of course, but for my identity's sake, that is what you'll know me as. And this is the story of how I grew up in the CIA, where my mom and dad were a part of a secretive study, which was one that was being done by the government. And their role and mine was to be a family living at a farm, as a front. Since the farm we lived at was actually owned by the government, who stored things there, like secret underground labs and facilities, weapons, and classified documents. But what most had me both intrigued and terrified at the same time was the monsters they kept there as well. Yes, you heard me right. The very things people have been arguing over for years, claiming they exist, and claiming they don't, was kept just a few feet from my house, in a large red barn that had a well-hidden hatch that led underground. But not all monsters were taken underneath. Some were kept in the barn itself, where experiments were conducted. And for the most part, I steered clear of that barn, not only because I feared the beasts inside of it, but also because the guards could be mean at times, so I stayed away from them the best I could. But there was one night that my curiosity and dumbness got the better of me, and it was one of many nights I would never forget. It was pretty late, around 1 o'clock in the morning, I reckon, when I was awakened by a loud crashing sound coming from the barn, and I was surprised it didn't wake my mom and dad, who were closer to the noise than I was. But surprisingly, they never came out of their room that night. I climbed out of bed and ran to the living room, so I could look at the barn through the windows, and to my shock, there was no guards walking around like they usually did. The night was still, and lit by the moon, and the only thing going on at the time was the loud banging still coming from the barn, and I knew what it was that was making the noise, and it wasn't human. But where was everyone? The scientists, the soldiers who guarded the property, the CIA agents that could be seen going in and out of the barn, were nowhere to be found. Which had my young naive mind telling me to go to the barn, which was something I should never have done, because the events that followed that night scarred me for life. Neglecting to alert my parents about the strangeness of what was happening at that moment, I went against my better judgment, and slowly opened up my front door, so the creaking of the hinges didn't screech out, and I made my way outside, where I cautiously left the front porch, all while looking around me, to make sure I wasn't spotted by anyone. And that's when I quietly snuck over to the big red barn, and put my ear up to the big wooden door, to try and listen for the loud pounding sounds to begin again. But everything remained silent, not even insects were making their usual night noises. Now look, I wasn't a very brave kid, nor did I ever normally do what I did that night. It was a one-time thing for me, leaving the safety of my house, and going to the big red barn. But something drew me to it. It was like something told me to go there, like it was my purpose. So I did what I shouldn't have, and I grabbed the handle to the barn door, and slowly opened it, before cautiously making my way inside for the first time. Once in, I would begin to smell this disgusting odor, so foul it had me gagging, and almost throwing up at times, but I just covered my nose and mouth with my hands, and started to walk around. Inside the barn was laboratory tables, with glass jars full of substances, of what you may question. Well, I couldn't tell you, but I know it had to be something to do with the creatures they've captured. Other things in the barn was stuff like chains attached to the walls, that was meant to hold something. There was also pictures of horrifying creatures, along with maps and diagrams stuck to the wall. But what caught my eye the most was the cages that sat in a corner to themselves, that was covered up by tarps, so no prying eyes could see them. And the only reason I knew they were cages was because I watched the soldiers carry them into the barn, and the square shape of the cages gave them away, even when they were covered up. And that was the moment my life changed forever, not seeing the cages, but hearing the unsettling growling coming from within them, had my little heart pounding unbelievably fast. I knew I was standing not even 10 feet away from a monster, and it sounded mad, and it knew I was there. Out of nowhere that thing began to roar, as it began to pound on the cage, causing it to shake violently, until it happened, the sound of iron breaking, making the door to the cage tumble over, as the tarps that covered it fell down, revealing the non-human beast to me, and it was what most people called a Sasquatch. It was massive, at least 9 feet tall, and as hairy as a grizzly, but its face, it was like looking at a tall man covered in hair all over. It was terrifying, yet shocking to see, especially at such a young age. But all I could do was stand still, not able to budge an inch, and I had the gut feeling if I did, that thing would not only get angry, but would pursue me with a predatory outcome. So I stayed froze, petrified, and remained still, as I watched the beast step out of the cage, as it began to check out its surroundings by sniffing a lot, and picking things up off the lab tables as it glanced at them like it's a new discovery. But as things seemed to have calmed down with the creature, the sounds of vehicles pulling up to the barn, and soldiers shouting out to each other on the outside, had that thing go off again, causing it to growl and shout out in an extremely deep voice, before it ran through the wall, making a hole appear, as pieces of debris flew through the air, from the wall collapsing. I knew I had to hide, and stay out of sight, so I quickly ran and ducked behind barrels that sat close to the entrance, and stayed as quiet as I could, as soldiers rushed into the barn, in pursuit of the Sasquatch that had escaped. And once they all had left, going into the forest, where I'm guessing they had tracked the massive beast, I made my way back out of the barn, and returned to my house, just in time to see more military trucks full of soldiers pull up, and begin searching the farm. So I rushed back to my bedroom, and laid in bed with my eyes closed, hoping that no one spotted me, or that my mom and dad didn't come into my room, which they didn't, but I did hear soldiers come inside and begin to walk throughout the house, upstairs and down. And at one point, one of them opened my bedroom door for a few seconds before closing it back. And after a while they left, returning to the outside, where I could hear them shouting out commands to each other, so I remained laying down, and I eventually fell asleep. The following day, after I woke up and walked downstairs, I was greeted by my parents and a few agents from the CIA who questioned me about the previous night, asking me if I had seen anything. Knowing it would most likely get me in trouble, and possibly my parents, I just told them that I heard loud bangs coming from the barn, followed by a loud crash, and then soldiers running through the house. After giving me a solid stare for a minute, the agents would then turn their attention back on my parents, and proceeded to tell them that Specimen H, code name Harry, escaped the previous night, where he went on to kill and half-eat a couple camping in their tent in the middle of the woods, before soldiers were able to take him out and recover the body. And just hearing them say that to my parents, just about made me pee my pants, just thinking to myself that my fate could have been the same. But I just sat there, and did my best to pretend like I didn't know what was going on, and have kept what I experienced that night in the big red barn a secret, until I found the courage to write this down. The government blamed the killing of the young couple camping on a brown bear, and no one questioned it. And the soldiers brought the dead Sasquatch back to the farm, where scientists experimented on its body, before taking it underground to dispose of it. After growing up, I too joined the CIA like my mom and dad, but made sure to steer clear of hunting monsters, or anything supernatural, for the simple reason of coming close to being a meal of the beast, known as Bigfoot. Now I'm living my last days with my wife on my own farm, free of government agents and army soldiers, but I often sit sometimes out on my front porch, while staring at the woods, wondering to myself if there's something out there, staring back. Heck, you never know, one day you, yourself, might just come face to face with a monster. If so, what would you do?